Hello, my name is Daniel Mosier. I'm doing my Eagle Scout project in oral history of the city of Kettering. I'm joined today by Mr. Wasky. Mr. Wasky, if you could introduce yourself a little bit more fully and tell us your participation in Kettering city government over the years, please.
Sure. I'm currently serving as Vice Mayor of the City of Kettering. I've been a City Councilman for 19 years. This is my 5th term. We serve 4-year terms. This is my 5th term, and that equals 19 years right now. And I currently am Chairman of the Intergovernmental Relations Committee and serve on the Personnel and Finance Committee within the City Council.
Kind of a quick question here about that. You said you started in 1987, or you might not have said it, but that's the truth. You know, you do the subtraction, 2006 minus 19, there you go. How did you get interested in serving on City Council? What motivated you to do that?
Actually, it kind of goes back to my days in college. When I was an undergraduate at Cleveland State University, I was majoring in electrical engineering, but I always had a strong interest in politics and world affairs. That sort of stayed with me over the years. Later on, when I came to live here in Kettering in the early 1970s, I became active in the community. I became president of our neighborhood association. I was a baseball, t-ball coach for my kids who were playing baseball at that time. Got involved in a lot of activities at church, within the community, and that sort of built. And then finally the councilwoman, Mrs. Keister, who was councilwoman in my district, District 3, decided to retire. So I said, I'm going to make a run for it. And the rest is history, as they say.
Exactly. And apparently you enjoyed it because you've run for re-election, what, 4 more times?
That's right.
And gotten it every time, so you've obviously enjoyed your service. Or I'm assuming that that's the case.
Absolutely. If I didn't enjoy it, I wouldn't be doing this.
Exactly.
But
Yeah,
it's sort of a labor of love because, as I said, in my daytime job, I'm an engineer, and at night I get to become a city councilman, vice mayor. And it's 2 very different sides of life. One, you're dealing with analytical things and technical skills. The other one, you have to deal with the public and personal skills, communications, and I just enjoy the dichotomy of the 2.
Sure. Now you served between 1987 and the present, so that means you served the entire decade of the 1990s, so that means you'd be pretty well qualified to talk about what Kettering city government was like during the 90s. Maybe you could give us an overview of what that was like.
Well, in the 1990s, Kettering was, well, much as it is today, it's a sort of a bedroom community is how we would describe ourselves, although we have industry. We have General Motors and now Delphi. We had Frigidaire at that time in providing a major source of our tax base. But it was a community of people who wanted to raise their families and send them to excellent schools. And that's what brought most people to Kettering and brings most people to Kettering even today. The thing that I would say had changed in Kettering during that period of time was our population became older. Much of Kettering was built up when it was Van Buren Township and City of Kettering.
Right.
It was built up in the 1950s and 1960s. So a lot of things were built up, neighborhoods were built up at about the same time. And so consequently, when everyone's kids grew up and went off to college or went off to jobs, we had a lot of empty nesters who decided, I've lived here in Kettering all these years, I want to stay. But that meant that then there was no housing available for new, younger families to come in. So as a result, our population went down dramatically. We were at a peak at 70,000. Now we're just slightly under 60,000 people. It's led to a number of school closings over the years, an aging population. About a quarter of our population today is age 65 and above. But we're starting to see that change as time goes on and there's turnover. We're seeing neighborhoods becoming revitalized, more young families moving in, and so I think the whole city is going to be going through this turnover over the next decade.
So what kind of building projects, if any, were there in the 1990s, like anything the council, let's just say major projects the council would have been working on during that time period?
I think the first one that comes to mind, which actually was started and probably completed then, was the development of Lincoln Park, Lincoln Place, the Fraze Pavilion. That used to be a tract of farmland, or actually vacant land, called the Johnson Tract. The city acquired that and decided to develop it and make it our centerpiece of a neighborhood walkable area complete with fountains and water pools and of course the Fraze Pavilion. that sort of thing. That was one of our first major developments that I was involved in, having a hand in those days. And then later in the throughout the 90s, I think things stayed relatively flat. It wasn't until we got into 2000s when we started to do more developments, say such as tearing down the old Hills and Dales Shopping Center,
Right.
developing that into Governor Square, and building the skate park and things like that. But that was probably the most significant development that we had in the 90s.
Well, since you were a participant in that, maybe you could talk about that a little bit. Whose idea was it to come up with this? Or was it just like a general consensus that we need something like this to show off Kettering?
The idea actually came about a little before the time I started to serve on council. It was already a progress in work. The main questions were, when I came on the city council, is, you know, how expansive do we want to make this? What do we really want it to look like? The decision had already been made to go ahead and create Lincoln Park. And then along came the phrase. And we wanted the phrase to be funded as little as possible with public money. So that meant that the city and the city staff had to put together a tremendous fundraising effort, and they did. And they raised, we set a threshold and said, you have to get to this percentage. I think it was like 80% of the cost of the phrase pledged from private donations. And the city did finally get to that point, but we needed to get the other 20%. And so we said, let's put out a call for people, some major donors, and if they come up with the right amount of funding, we will name this after them. And that's how the phrase got its name, from the Ermel Fraze family. Mr. Fraze, who you may or may not know, was the inventor of the pop top on top of soft drink cans, and other things too. But that was one of the things he's most noted for. So his family came up with the funding to kind of push it over the top. They got the naming rights, and away we went with that.
Wow, that's interesting. I hadn't heard that before. It's just, you know, I never really thought, you know, the Fraze Pavilion named after someone. It'd be interesting to have a last name of Fraze. But yeah, that's a good story to hear. The 90s, as with every decade, there were certainly some world and national events that occurred that were very major, that were in the news at the time. How did these events, well, what were they, and how did they affect Kettering at this time, if at all?
I would say that for me, when I think of the 1990s, the largest world event, most significant event, was the fall of communism in Eastern Europe. This actually had its beginning in Poland, and I happen to be Polish, so I have a Polish heritage there. That actually began with the Solidarity movement in the late 1980s, and then it rapidly spread through Eastern Europe, and then eventually the Soviet Union collapsed, as we knew it then. That was a huge change in the whole sea state within the world, and then that President Bush, who served at that time, our 40th president, said we had a new world order in place, that things had changed that dramatically throughout the world. How it affected Kettering is a little harder to say, except that it did open the doors for us to deal with some Eastern European countries. And in particular, the last several years, we've been working with not so much a sister city, but we've been working with the city council and city staff of the city of Silesia, Bulgaria, and Silestra, Bulgaria, I'm sorry. And we have had an exchange program where they would send their public personnel here to be trained in how do you run a government in a democratic society? How do you get funding for projects? How do you do this? How do you do that? Meanwhile, we sent people over there to show them how to do things like how do you develop a public park system? How do you provide services to your city employees, which up until that time was provided by the state, now was relegated to the city, and the cities didn't really know how to do these things. It's amazing the things that we take for granted in running our own governments that people in other parts of the world, in this case Eastern Europe, had no clue. So that was our tie to Eastern Europe after the fall of communism.
Certainly. Now also in the 90s, this just came to mind, the Dayton Peace Accords, that was in the mid-90s. How did that affect Kettering, if at all? I mean, was that, I don't really know, was it focused more at Wright Pat, where it was being held, or didn't that have anything to do with Kettering as well? Well,
it was focused at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base at the Hope Hotel. That's where the negotiations were held. However, I will tell this story. The night that they had, actually, is Milosevic and his crew in town. Happened to be election night, and it was one of the elections that I was running in. I was running for re-election, and we couldn't figure out why the election returns were not coming in that night on television. They had election returns from all over the county, but all the votes in Kettering were down to 2%, 1%. Nothing was coming in. Well, what had happened was the Dayton Accords Committee had met at a restaurant. It's the La Berge restaurant on Far Hills, and that whole area was cordoned off with by police. Well, it turns out in the south central suburbs, all of the ballots were collected and brought to the National City Bank, which is next door to La Berge. So the ballots couldn't get in or out to get downtown to be counted. And we didn't know what had happened for many, many hours. And finally, all of a sudden, there's the results on the television showing who won the election. And I was one of those fortunate winners of that election.
That's an interesting story. It must have been a little bit nerve-wracking. What's going on? People decide not to vote. I mean, that's just 1 or 2%. That's ridiculous.
We knew there was a glitch somewhere, but we didn't know where it was.
Has to be, sure. Now, from your term of service when it started in 1987, certainly there's been plenty of change in Kettering from the Frays Pavilion being developed, as you mentioned, to park systems being improved upon and such. Other than that, maybe how has Kettering changed since then? Maybe businesses and developments, things of that nature.
Well, we have seen the closure of Frigidaire plant. We've seen downsizing at General Motors and Delphi. We saw the closing of the DESI facility, Defense Electronic Supply Center, out on Wilmington Pike. That was a huge impact to the city because we lost over 2,000 jobs.
Wow.
And those were high-paying jobs. And trying to recover from that was really tough. We had to go through a real belt-tightening period, and we had to work with the United States Air Force and the General Services Agency to redevelop this land, which took many, many, many meetings and many, many years to do. What we have as a result is Kettering Business Park. The city did acquire the land eventually, and we were able to become the prime developer of that. And it's turned into a beautiful business park. So we don't have an empty facility, which in many cities would have happened. They would have just had this empty facility on hundreds of acres of land and nothing to do. We turned it into something positive and brought jobs back in.
Now, certainly that has been developed, the business plaza there, but isn't there some space of that facility still left unused at this point? Is there? I remember I see driving by there. There's like, I don't know, I describe them as hangars since they're in that kind of a shape. But what? I mean, are there any plans to do anything with that? And the city just tried to got the business part done, and then what's the deal with the rest of it? Maybe
there is still some room for development. The buildings that you're talking about, of course, if you look at them, they basically were giant warehouses. They're long, wide, factory space type places, which for DESI was fine, but for smaller businesses, it's too much. It's too much room, and we don't have the kind of business and industry that could occupy all of that space. So it's had to be divided and subdivided up into smaller pieces. Plus, the buildings have to be maintained. We maintain the buildings that we do not currently own. We've sold off some of the other buildings. And so, yeah, there's still more room for growth, more room for opportunity, and we continually look for tenants to fill those buildings.
Well, that's good. Maybe this will be kind of a looking into the future question, since you served since from 1987 to the present, and you're still serving right now. Maybe this is a personal question. If you don't feel comfortable answering it, sure, you don't feel obligated. But do you see yourself continuing on after your term is up, this current term you're in?
I'll answer that question the way I've answered it every time at the end of every term.
Okay.
What will the future bring? I really don't know. I just enjoy being involved. What comes will come, is the way I see it. I don't have a grand master plan laid out. I never have. That's just not my nature. And I will just see what happens.
Now, what about for Kettering, the city itself? What do you see happening in the next decade or so for the city of Kettering?
We're going to see a lot of redevelopment. As you know, Kettering's landlocked, essentially. And so other than the recent acquisition of land on the eastern part of Kettering, going into Greene County a little bit, we've had no real room to develop and expand. But so what we're focusing on is redevelopment of properties. For instance, you will see redevelopment of Town and Country Shopping Center. There's already plans in the works to do that. The Groby, what used to be the Groby Garden Center on Far Hills, is being redeveloped into a new use, a mixed use of commercial real estate, retail and some housing. Van Buren Shopping Center, again, a shopping center that went out of business and was vacant for many, many years, has been completely torn down and being redeveloped again as mixed use with private homes, some space, the post office is still there, that sort of thing. So what you will continue to see is redevelopment and upgrading of things. Wilmington Pike is one of our huge priorities. Wilmington Pike was developed way back when we were just a township, and there were little or no zoning applied. So you have a lot of buildings that are sort of a hodgepodge. They're sitting at different angles. Some are close to the street, some are far back from the street. There's no sidewalk along much of it. We're in the process of redesigning that, and as property becomes available, it's redeveloped. It will be redeveloped to our current standards. So you will see much of that sort of thing. Plus, redevelopment of our housing stock. Our housing, of course, in Kettering is 40, 50, some cases, well, maybe 60 years old even. And that's always a concern, especially for an inner ring, first tier suburb as we are. We're the first tier next to Dayton. And so we're working to come up with creative ways of providing low interest loans to our residents, particularly those who are elderly and can meet low income or middle income criterion, to give them the funds necessary to upgrade their homes. We want people to stay here. We want them to upgrade, improve their homes. And when they're just financially not able to, that's when we have been working with them through various federally funded programs and kicked in some city money as well to help get them going and upgrade their homes as much as possible.
Excellent. Now say you were someplace else other than Kettering, of course, and you met someone and asked you where you were from. Oh, I'm from Kettering. Oh, I've never heard of Kettering before. Maybe could you describe Kettering to this hypothetical person? What's the city like? What are the people like? What's special about Kettering, I guess?
I would describe Kettering as a very friendly, family-oriented community. Our residents are top-notch. We have people who volunteer hundreds and hundreds of hours every year. We have one of the largest volunteer programs in the country, especially for a city our size. We win national awards all the time. People want to become involved, help their government, serve their government in any way, and giving of time and talent and everything like that. It's a community where you can come and raise a family and be safe, have a safe community with very good schools, excellent city services. I'd like to think that I've had a little role in making that come about by making government very responsive. We're very forward-looking. I believe as most city governments go, we are extremely forward-looking. We're not just looking at the past and wishing we could be back there. We're looking out there and saying, where do we want to go from here? Been a lot of work on long-range strategic planning for the city, and I expect us to continue doing that. But it is a community of neighbors, of families, of volunteers, many single people, of course, as well, rounds it out. And we have a whole variety of housing types, ranging from moderately priced homes all the way up to the top end, very high-priced homes and estates. So we have a huge variety of housing.
Certainly.
Opportunities abound, but it's just a warm, friendly community that encompasses a whole range of people and backgrounds.
Excellent. I forgot to ask this earlier, actually. I don't know what happened with that. But anyways, looking into the future, again, we talked about that a little bit. Kettering's had a history of major installations leaving. You mentioned the Frigidaire and Desi and something else, which I don't remember right now. But Delphi, or Delco, is looming on the horizon a little bit with GM's continued struggles. What do you see happening with that? What's your opinion on that situation, and how do you see it turning out?
We're keeping a very close eye on it. Of course, those decisions, whether to remain open, remain closed, are really made at the top level in the boardroom of any corporation. The same is true of Delphi. Oftentimes we little or no insight into what they're thinking at the corporate level until they make an announcement. And so we try to draw up contingency plans. What would we do if this happens, or what would we do if that happens? And we have a really good, excellent city staff. Our planning department just are excellent, par none. And they're very good at being creative in ways of, again, redeveloping properties, should those properties become available, turning them into something they were not before, giving us opportunities and possibilities that we didn't have because, again, we didn't have the land to do some of these new developments. One of the things I'm very proud of is something that we put up a few years ago, not long ago, was the Rob Deerdeck Skateboard Plaza. First of its type in the country. It's not a skateboard park, it's a skate plaza. It's an urban style, for urban style street skating. And it's gotten national attention. It's been on many TV shows. It continues to draw national attention wherever we go. That's a unique facility, something we're very proud of. It's a great outlet for our youth. It's a safe environment. Those kinds of things are the creative things that I think we're doing here in Kettering, and I expect that we'll continue to do so.
Well, thank you, Mr. Wasky, for being here today. I really appreciate your taking your time and doing this.
You're welcome. I'm glad to be here.
Now be sure to tune in for the next segments of An Oral History of the City of Kettering. I'm Daniel Mosher.